Hello and welcome back to episode 10, double figures of my Stuarts vlog, and the last on theme number 1. Hopefully the other themes will be quicker because there's less complexity in them, and we've established quite a lot of the story already. This vlogcast is focusing on James II. Last time I said that we were looking at the themes that undermined Charles' position, Charles II's position as king, and I mentioned that there were other themes than money and power and religion, and of course I never mentioned those, but of course they include the personality of Charles as an individual, and Parliament as well, and you could probably separate perhaps the rise of nonconformity and the fear of Catholicism if you wanted. And you could talk about the impact of foreign policy, perhaps with the Anglo-Dutch Wars and the French alliance. This time we're just focusing on the story of James II, and I mention that now because the personality and character of James II, I think, are key. A bit like Charles I, it's really difficult to explain why things went so wrong so quickly for James without really focusing in on what sort of man he was and the decisions that he took. Not least because he was an open Catholic, but when Charles II, his brother, died on the 6th of February 1685, wrong century, 6th of February 1685, James II became king with very little fuss. He was then crowned on the 23rd of April pretty quickly, and again, a little fuss, no bother. And his first parliament, he seemed to be making the right noises. He said he would forgive almost all the exclusionists of Charles, his brother's reign, who had opposed him becoming king, and Parliament for their part offer James II full rights on tonnage and poundage, and a good settlement. In fact, things are going so well that in June 1685, when the Duke of Monmouth launches a rebellion in Somerset, it ends in complete catastrophe, and very few people join him in rising up again. The Duke of Monmouth, just to explain, Charles II's illegitimate Protestant son, a popular figure during Charles II's reign. And it's kind of surprising that he meets such a kind of easy end, really, I suppose, in that fight, the Battle of Sedgemoor. However, this is kind of where the story starts to turn, and really I'd say the James II story is about explaining why it was in that 1685, in the early months, the spring of 1685, why the majority of England, certainly the establishment, are willing to take on a Catholic monarch, but why 3 years later they literally chase him out of the country and invite William of Orange to come and sort things out. So as I said, that starts really, I think, in the aftermath of the Monmouth rebellion. James II is quite vengeful. 250 men are executed, including the Duke of Monmouth himself, in quite a messy beheading in London. Also, Charles, there's also a rebellion in Scotland which is put down fairly easily. James II was now quite suspicious of the problems of rebellion. Both rebellions had started in Holland and had set sail from there. They hadn't been sorted out by the Dutch government. They hadn't really given them help either, but they'd kind of let them hang around and then leave, of course. So James II wants to raise a standing army. Now Parliament's pretty nervous about this already, and then James II says, and I want some Catholic army officers, people who I know are loyal to me and my cause. And so he launches this first wave of personal dispensations. This is the ability of the king at that time to say, look, I know the law applies to everyone, but not these people. I am personally going to write that this person the law does not apply to. This actually leads to the dismissal of Parliament in November 1685, and from then on James II rules alone, without Parliament at all. So that dispute or even dialogue between Parliament and King is immediately undermined. One of the men that James II brings in as a Catholic army officer is Hales, who is then encouraged to bring a law case, a case to test whether James actually has this right. So he's a gentleman, he's given command of a regiment of foot by James II, and his servant Godden brings a case against him, and he wins that case, and Hales is convicted of having broken the law. But Hales, on appeal, under pressure from James II, wins the right to be a Catholic and an army officer 11-1 by the judges. They rule 11-1 in his favour, and it's confirmed that James does indeed have the right to dispense with the law on particular bases. Now that's the case of an individual. There were more individual Catholic army officers. This was quite worrying. James then spreads that out to freedom of worship, not only for Catholics, but for all non-conformists. So the 1687 Declaration of Indulgence was the same principle, the personal dispensation for all Catholics and non-conformists to not have to go to Anglican church, but to worship freely wherever they wanted on a Sunday morning without being persecuted for it. Now this can either be seen as James starting the thin end of the wedge, pushing towards having a Catholic dominated or Catholic absolutist state. It's possible. Or it could be seen as James quite rightly trying to correct some of the imbalances of the previous 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, which have really persecuted Catholics and to an extent non-conformists as well. And you can see that too. But on the whole, I think historians tend to say James pushed too far, too fast, and was over-ambitious in trying to push his Catholic line. He continues this through remodelling borough charters. Now this is a bit nerdy in terms of its history, but what that basically means is that the charter for a borough, a town, would say who could be a magistrate and hold other positions in the town, like mayor and stuff like that. And Charles II actually started this. James II continued the process of rewriting those, and that led to the appointment of Catholic magistrates in a number of boroughs. He sets up an ecclesiastical court. This is a church court. Technically this was illegal, so that's worrying to start with, but it gave that ecclesiastical court had the power to make and unmake appointments. That was used to put Catholics in positions at Oxford University, in Christ Church, in University College, two big Christ College and University College at Oxford University, two of the bigger colleges, and then to expel fellows from Magdalen College at Oxford when they resisted the promotion of a chap called Anthony Farmer, who was suspected of being a secret Catholic and, it seems, wasn't really up to the job that James II was appointing him. Magdalen College, by the way, is spelled strangely Magdalen, but pronounced Magdalen for reasons that I have no idea. So James is kind of continuing this run of establishing Catholic rights. It's not a takeover yet, but there's a definite erosion of the state by James. And the fear, as I said, is that he's setting things up in order to allow for his absolutist presence on the throne. So that actually it's about a power grab more than it is about religion. And there again, you can see our old friends power and religion as being the two competing themes of why things went wrong. This is also in the context of events in France where Protestants were being openly and viciously persecuted by the French Catholic absolutist monarch, who was a relation of James II. So all that kind of adds up to bad PR for James II at the very least. It gets worse in 1688, obviously. In April 1688, James II wonders why there aren't many people taking up his very attractive Declaration of Indulgence, and he finds actually not many people perhaps know about it. So he demands in April 1688 that the Declaration of Indulgence be read from every Church of England pulpit on a particular Sunday morning. Now this is both an effective and clever way of making sure that everyone hears it in the day before, the internet and news and even reliable newspapers or the radio. But it's also completely offensive to Church of England clergy. They're supposed to stand up in their church, which they believe in wholeheartedly, and say to people, look, I believe you should be here. I believe that this is the right way. I think that Catholics are going to hell. But if you want to be a Catholic, fine, go ahead. You can leave now, and off you go. So a number of Anglican ministers were against this, and this led to their refusal to take that, or to read out that Declaration of Indulgence. This is known as the trial of the 7 bishops. So these 7 bishops refused to read out the Declaration of Indulgence. They're put on trial, and to great excitement and acclaim, they are acquitted. It is found that James II does not have the ability under law to force these bishops to read out this Declaration of Indulgence. Importantly, amongst this group is William Sancroft. Sancroft is Sancroft. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury. In April 1685, William Sancroft had crowned James II in Westminster Abbey and sworn to uphold and protect him as monarch for the rest of his life. In April 1688, 3 years later, almost exactly 3 years later, he defies James II and effectively starts the process of bringing him down. So that process really, you can see, bookended by William Sancroft, and I guess illustrated by his rejection of what James II stands for. The final straw is on the 10th of June, when Mary of Modena, James II's second wife, who was a Catholic. His first wife was a Protestant, and that's why he has two Protestant, adult Protestant daughters, Mary and Anne. Mary, of course, who married William of Orange, and Anne, who becomes queen after William and Mary in 1700s. What was I saying? Mary of Modena, that's right. She gave birth to a son. Now, a lot of people, it seems, have been putting up with James II because they thought he's old, he's Catholic, and when he dies, Mary, his daughter, will become queen with William of Orange, and they will be Protestants, and kind of things will go back to how they were. But with the arrival of James II's son, James, this becomes unlikely, of course, and the idea of a Catholic succession spurs people into action. 2 days later, a bunch of politicians, including some Whigs, some Tories, and members of the establishment church, the Church of England, write to William of Orange and ask him to come and sort this out. And that triggers the Glorious Revolution. I should say one other thing that I had picked up in preparing for this was that through 1688, the other thing that James II had been doing was trying to prepare the ground for an election. He actually called the election in August 1688, and his idea here was to try and get a Catholic dominant, or at least Catholic sympathetic parliament brought in, full actually of nonconformists as well, in order to undo those anti-Catholic and anti-nonconformist laws and allow for greater freedom of religion. So, as I said, you can either see this time as being one of freedom, and actually it is the most religiously free period of our entire Stuarts course, even more so than the Glorious Revolution. And you can see James II as quite a sympathetic character who is just trying to loosen the chains of oppression, or you can see him as an evil Catholic mastermind who's trying to plot over to the crown. Certainly that's what some people amongst the elite felt, and that's why they invited William of Orange to come in the Glorious Revolution. Thanks so much. I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you next time.